see the slides. All right. So one more thing. Just don't want to have these toolbar at the end, at the top. Yes, now it's better. All right. So 2 minutes past 11. Time to start. So thank you, first of all, for coming to my presentation. You had many other choices, and you chose to be here. So thank you for that. Hopefully, you won't be disappointed. So the presentation that I will be presenting today, the material that I will be presenting, is career after reaching senior individual level. So everything that happens in terms of the engineering career, or might happen, or might be needed after the senior level of the software engineering. Before we go into that, I wanted to give you, a very quick introduction who I am. So my name is Paweł Dolega, and I am CTO at Virtus Lab. Virtus Lab is software engineering and a consulting company. Today, roughly 400 people after connecting with Software Mill. And we do many different things, but I think 3 main themes that we do today is working around the Scala ecosystem. We do work with the development experience area, and we do work with something that is called machine learning engineering. So everything that is engineering around the machine learning. I personally have roughly 20 years of experience, give or take 1 year. And if you wish, you can connect with me on Twitter or X, although I'm not posting there a lot. But what is perhaps more interesting for you, and hopefully something that you may find some more information as an idea about the material that I will be presenting, I have the publication on Substack. And I think by the end of this week, the material that I am presenting here today would be put there as a more extensive article. There is already 2 articles there that I created before the summer break about the topic of building engineering framework in the organization, engineering progression framework. So if that's something that is interesting for you, you can take a look and see if that's something that would be interesting for you. Now, a little bit of a maybe structure of the presentation. So I wanted to start with the prologue, how I even came to think about this whole career path after the senior software role in technical organizations. And really this thing started while we were building the engineering progression in our organization. And then we go to path leading to the senior role, so we could have a good juxtaposition and contrast with the path that is happening after the senior role, which would be the chapter 2 of the presentation. And then we wrap it up with some skills, attitudes, and everything that you might need in order to progress your career further after this senior level. So let's start then with this prologue, with how it's, how we started to think about what is really needed and how the career changes after the senior engineering level. So we started building the engineering progression at Virtus Lab. We already had one that was created, I think it was circa 2017, something like that. And it was really simple. I think back then I created it might have taken me 2 evenings, something like that. Of course, there was a lot of consultations later on, but it was relatively simple. The problem that we had was that after the company grew and we have many more departments and different areas and the middle management grew, we started to see some inconsistencies. That means that there were some people or some areas when people that had, when you two managers talked with one another, they realized they might have 2 people that seemed to have similar contribution level to the organization, and yet for some reason, one of them was, for instance, assigned a senior role, and the other one was mid-level role. Because, a lot of things are subjective. Different people were assessing these engineers, and there weren't really good guidelines, very tangible guidelines, how you could assess engineer to be on a given level. And I've taken some example from the from Kickstarter engineering ladder. And by the way, this example is taken from the page which is called Levels FYI. And if you are interested in different engineering ladders in many organizations, widely recognized or not that recognized, Levels FYI is the page that you can see a lot of different engineering progression ladders from many different organizations. The interesting thing is that they have many different forms, but a lot of the things are in common, although the types of the organizations are very different. You can find small organizations there, like, I don't know, Circle CI, maybe a few hundred people. And then you find Google, for instance, obviously, you know, tens of thousands of people. So typical engineering progression starts with something like, you know, at the top, I highlighted the section, which is the name of the level, and there is some sort of it really starts with the sentence, junior engineers are at the start of their career. So it sort of implies the level of experience. Now there is, or the years of experience. It doesn't explicitly say about the years of experience, but it says about some sort of experience that the person on that level has, which is sort of interesting thing because there is a heated debate in the industry, I think, about whether years of experience really matter. Like, there is a difference between 5 years of experience and, as they say, 1 year of experience repeated 5 times. And that's certainly true. Nonetheless, in many engineering progressions, there is at least a hint which gives you a guideline about what kind of experience person on a given level has. Now, the other thing is that you have something that is called here, the section that describes capabilities. So what the person on this given level should be capable of doing. And then you have some other area which is described typically scope. So this junior engineer, at Kickstarter at least, should be able to work on well-scoped components of a larger projects and features and so on and so on. And then there is something that highlights the main focus for the engineer on the given level of experience. So for juniors, the one of the most important thing, if not the most important thing, is learning. Typically, learning technical things, so extending technical knowledge. And then there is typically something like the key areas to develop to progress further into the next steps in the engineering career. So this is pretty common. Like in many different organizations, it may take different forms, but the content of those of those sections, even though presented differently, is something that is repeatable in a way. So what we understood, because we started with sort of something like that, we understood that after the company became bigger and bigger, and as I said, we had these inconsistencies between different departments, we came to the conclusion, we are not the only one, there are many organizations like that, that we want to figure out what the really engineering activities at our organization, because engineering progression should be tailored for your organization, what are the key competencies or attitudes that the engineering capabilities really boil down to. So we broke it down into several different competencies, and we wanted also to cover the lifetime of the career. We didn't want to focus on maybe the path from the very beginning to the senior level of engineering, but we also wanted to think about someone who might be already 20 years in the industry, and probably in some companies might be a staff level engineer or principal engineer or distinguished engineer or maybe engineering manager, right, as a path branching from the pure technical engineering. And we also wanted to fit this thing into various types of the engineering roles. So we sort of understood that when we talk about designers like UX designers might be a little bit different than, say, DevOps. But we sort of understood that it might be a little bit different, so there might be a need for having a little bit of a different engineering progression. But we also thought that there is no point in creating so many different engineering ladders that, for instance, front-end engineers would have completely different ladder than a back-end engineer or infrastructure engineer. So we wanted to have still fairly general. Now, eventually we came to this conclusion that we have 3 different areas of competencies that software engineers at Virtus Lab should really cover to various extent to perform well the engineering work at our company. So one, obviously, was technical skills. Obviously, because we talk about a software engineering role, which is a technical role. And that is something that, that was relatively obvious, first thing that came to our mind. Then we thought about something that is delivery, or some companies call it getting shit done, or getting stuff done, or whatever. And this is about how well those engineers can really deliver what they are working for. So I guess that some of us, or maybe all of us, know some brilliant engineers that know all the stuff, they know technologies, they know trends that are happening in the market, but for some reason, they are just unable to deliver anything. Or they are able to deliver something, but it takes a lot of time and, far beyond the deadlines that were initially, set. And if that was for a good reason, that would be probably okay, but sometimes there might be even, people that spend, a lot of time trying to make the particular, code base on the work that they are doing perfect, which is probably fine in certain industries. We work at, in business, and there is always, as opposed to, for instance, academia, and there is usually, at our line of work, there is usually a threshold after which there is significant diminishing returns to, to the further work on a given thing, and it is just good enough for our customers to pay for what was delivered, and there is no point spending more money and time on the particular feature. And the last area was teamwork. So how well those people are able to work with the other people within the team, because as a company, we sort of believe that the fundamental element of the structure of how we do projects, so the fundamental people structure is the team. And team consists of at least 2 people. We sometimes do projects when there is 1 person, but this is usually an exception. And if this thing happen, we try to extend the team to at least 2 people. And even if it doesn't happen, there is always someone, with whom the single engineer, if there's a single engineer, works. So the teamwork is absolutely essential. So we broke down, those areas into particular competencies, and those competencies are not that important because I think you should tailor them to the particular, to the particulars and specificity of your company. But the thing is that we found out, after talking with many people and spending a lot of time on this, because it took us some time in the last year, that we boiled it down eventually to five technical skills. Then we broke down the delivery competencies into 6 skills or competencies, and then we broke down the teamwork competencies into 5 more skills or competencies. So as I said again, the particulars and the specific skills or competencies, something that you do every company, you figures this out on its own. But the important thing is, if you think about that, we had like 5, 6, 5, 5, 6, 5. It's like 16 competencies, and only out of the 16 competencies, 5 competencies were purely technical, and that was the engineering progression for software developers. And that made us think that a lot of what we do in the engineering is not strictly related to the technical skills. It's like, technical skills is obviously critical, and you have to get them, but in our line of business, it seemed that it's not the only thing that is important, and if you look at the numbers, it's 5 out of 16. That made us think, and we can hold on to this thought for a moment because I'll be coming back to this. And let's jump now to the, to this path up to the senior level. So how it starts from the very, early stages of the career up to the senior level engineering. So typically, in many organizations, you have something like levels like intern, junior, mid or regular, and senior. Different companies call it differently, like big tech like to call it, they like acronyms, so instead of intern, they would be like E2 or S2 or something like that, or SDE2. But at the end, this is the same. Intern is someone who usually works part-time during the university, junior is someone who is fresh out of the university, and so on and so on. So that's a repeated pattern. And if you think about that, the scope of work and the level of supervision that is required, again, it's fairly common. So interns usually work on the very well defined task, which was, by the way, mentioned on this first slide that I had at the very beginning from the Kickstarter progression. So the scope is very well defined. The supervision is very high. Usually they have someone who is more senior, and the more senior person tell them exactly what to do, even up to, the things like you're gonna go to that particular class or file and change this module and things like that. And the key focus, again, like in the example from the Kickstarter, is usually to learn and to get, some more understanding and to become at some point maybe junior or mid-level engineer. Now, the interesting thing is that in many organizations, whether it's explicit or implicit, this role is really up or out. And up or out is a term that is taken from the partnerships firms like legal companies, where you have, for instance, lawyers or different levels of seniority. And it means basically that you have a given time in which you got to be promoted to a next level or you are out of the company. It's very explicit in some partnership firms. It's not very explicit in technical firms, although I think, or software companies, although I think that implicitly it exists nearly everywhere. How many people do you know that are on the, intern level for 10 years of their career? It's very unlikely, and that's because usually at this stage of the career, those engineers because they are, and I misclicked, sorry about that, because they are learning and investing in developing skill for the company, they are investment, and there needs to be some sort of the return of investment at some point. Now, if we go further for the junior level, usually they work on a slightly bigger scope, so there might be a task or set of tasks, or maybe an epic, and they require less supervision, and they focus more on the project work. They start to, deliver something consistently. And again, junior role, implicitly or explicitly, in software companies, probably unlikely that it's explicit, but at least implicitly the role is again up or out. So you do the progression to the next level at some point, or probably you won't pass at some point you won't pass the performance review cycle. And then starts the mid-engineering level, which is an interesting one, because I believe the mid-engineering level or the regular level is really the backbone, the bedrock of most of the engineering organizations in the world. So these are people who are no longer sort of the investments. They bring value consistently through their work. They work on the scope of a single project, maybe with some foray outside of the projects, but they bring value, they build projects or deliver projects, they build product. They have limited supervision, but their supervision nonetheless. And the key focus, as I mentioned, is creating value via project deliveries. Now, they don't necessarily have, very well-defined solutions what they should do, but at least for most of the time, it's a spectrum, so it's not always the case. We talk about the, thing is more likely so or less likely so. So they are more likely to get well-defined problems if they exist in your organization, because if sometimes I look at certain Jira tickets, I have the impression that it very rarely happens that even problems are well specified. But nonetheless, they have specified at least problems, and they need to find the solutions themselves, and then they implement the solution. So also the execution is unknown, is left to them. And then we have the senior levels, which is the top level, the highest level that we'll be talking about in this section is the engineers who outside or maybe not in addition to the project work, they also have forays into inter-project work. They might talk with stakeholders. They might, talk with customers, with other teams, coordinate some initiatives, things like that. Their supervision becomes mostly peer supervision, so they might have other seniors that work with them. Sometimes, if the organization is capable of, they may have some staff level engineer or principal engineer will work with them. But the supervision is much less intensive than in case of any previous levels. And the key focus, as I mentioned, project work, but also inter-project work between different teams, and also organizational impact. So you would expect staff level engineers, which I would be talking about in a moment, to run the initiatives, like, improving the quality standards in the entire organizations. But the staff level engineers or principal engineers would do it with help of senior engineers who have the sufficient experience to help them in those areas. The problems at that point become, even less specified. So before we talked about the solutions and the implementations or executions, now even the problems are not that well specified, and handling uncertainty becomes a thing that a lot of senior engineers needs to deal with on a daily basis. And additionally, communication skills become of utmost importance. It's not that they weren't important earlier, but now it would be very obvious if they don't have the good communication skills, because as I mentioned, they talk with stakeholders, they talk with customers, they talk with other teams, and it would be a serious deficiency if they wouldn't be able to communicate well. And this is this branching point in the career that I would be discussing in the next section. And I think we came to the conclusion, for instance, in our engineering progression that there is a fairly straightforward path from intern through junior, mid to senior. But from senior, there might be several branches or career trajectories or archetypes, as they are called in Meta, for the next stages of the career. And I will be talking about this in a moment. The other way how we can look at this is also this notion of clarity, of uncertainty on the level of problem, solution, and execution. So you sort of have a junior engineer, and there might be a problem like we have invoicing system, and whenever there is a promotion assigned to a given customer of period of time, someone says, look, there is a problem. The invoice was generated incorrectly. That's a problem. Now, the solution from the business perspective is, there should be, additional line item at the end specifying promoted the item that is on promotion, and the amount should be $0. So that's a solution from the business perspective. And from the technical perspective, junior might go to someone who is, more experienced, maybe a senior engineer, and that person, the junior engineer would consult this more senior person, and the more senior person will say, yeah, you got to go to this, to this invoice service or module, and you probably at the end need to, add additional item or something like that. So there is also a solution, at least briefly described. It can be described from the technical perspective, and then the execution is left to the junior engineer. Then we have the mid, level engineer who might be given tasks like, there is a problem with the invoice. I don't really know what should be the solution. But you may go to Joe. Joe is from the accounting department, and talk to him, and maybe he'll tell you what solution should be. And by the way, while you were doing this, maybe put it in Jira ticket because no one put it there. So there is some expectations that start to communicating, talk with other people, and also figure out what should be the solution. And obviously, technical solution is you rely on mid-level engineers to find their technical solutions much more often than junior engineers. And then you have senior engineers, which are like sometimes. There is a problem with the service. We don't know what is happening. Go there, take a look. So there is not even, the problem is not even specified. And the problem might even not exist in the first place. So any one of you who spent, who got some, tickets or the request to check out something, to investigate something, spent like 2-3 weeks, and then you came out with, with the answer, what? It works as it should work. Like, that's the intended behavior. Like, I just spent 2 weeks on it, but it's fine. So everyone who experienced that know that the problem might be uncertain, and the existence of the problem might even be, not entirely sure. So this is the sort of this progression of uncertainty, or the, progression of uncertainty as you go through the progression levels in the engineering. Now, wrapping that up and discussing, we discussed different levels of skills, and we discussed this progress of uncertainty. We may go into this area of the next steps after the senior level engineering. So one of the typical things that I saw at the beginning of my career was the chart that's like this with stages that look like that, which is very simple. The only problem with it is that it's also wrong, right? And the advantage is that it's simple. So it's easy to understand. You go senior, and then the only thing that you can do is basically you need to go into management, and that's it, because engineering is a dead end. And that might have been true, by the way, maybe 10 or 20 years ago, especially in Poland, when we didn't have, the industry well developed yet. It's definitely not true in for instance, in the big tech, but even in Poland, it's not true anymore to the extent that it was in the past. I think when we talk about the overarching trajectories, we basically have these two paths. The first path is leadership, And although I don't like this name leadership for the reason I'll describe in a moment, I'd like to call it people management. And then there is this technical path. And when we talk about, I'll get back to this thought about this leadership distinction between leadership and people management in a moment. But if we think about the people management, it might be perhaps similar to what we saw before. So you were a senior engineer, and the next step is maybe a team lead. So you have, by the way, a weird role, difficult, but certainly rewarding. You need to have, some responsibilities from the technical part. You still need to do hands-on engineering and, individual contribution role. And then you have some people that you need to lead and do this people management responsibility. But the role is there. It's a question whether you put it in people management or technical path. Different companies choose differently because it's sort of on a crossing between those two. But the engineering manager is clearly people management role, that you have, heads perhaps, or a director or VP of engineering, and perhaps a CTO. The last one, again, questionable. It all depends on the kind of the company that you work for. Some companies do have separate CTO and VP of engineering. If they do, in that case, sometimes it's like CTO is more external facing and more doing research and things like that, and VP of engineering is handling the internal working of the organization, so everything that is happening today, team structure, career progressions, things like that might be driven by VP of engineering. So clearly a people management role. CTO sometimes is perceived as the most senior principal engineer, so more of a individual contribution role. But that depends on the companies. Generally, it might look like that. The other part, the technical, it's where it becomes a little bit more complicated, because you have those various roles that may go next, and it's like various trajectories. And one might be a tech lead, for instance, who is responsible for a particular area of a project or product, and including some technical architecture in that. There is the architect, who is, I think that the days where the architects were sitting in the Ebony Tower, they had white beards, and they were, scribing in UMLs, coming back to the, regular people after 2 weeks and presenting diagrams are over. But still, the architecture is a skill, and I think, at least my experience tells me so, not every good engineer, software engineer, is a good architect. The other way around should be perhaps, should perhaps still work, because we sort of expect architects these days to be hands-on. But it's a separate skill. There are people who thrive at the architecture on the higher level. So that's a role in many organizations. And if we talk about enterprise architecture, things like that, obviously a separate set of skills. Then we have process experts. So these are people who, for instance, are responsible for various processes in the organization, like maybe, improving the quality standards or building, engineering progression in the organization. Those people usually might be good candidates, for instance, for VP of engineering at some point. Then you have domain experts who know certain domain very well in the realms of, the connection of technology and the domain, like InsurTech or MedTech. What are the solutions there? What can you use? How you can integrate, things like that. Then you have a niche expert, someone who knows particular technology very well. Might be like, someone knows Kafka or streaming in general, is an expert in that. But the key thing is, and there are some other areas that we can, that we can talk about. But I think that the key from this thing is that, and then I want to come back to this distinction between leadership and people management. In all those roles, the leadership is a critical ingredient. There might not be direct people management, because those people might not have, direct, no one might report to them directly, but nonetheless, they need to have leadership skills, and they need to convince people to do things in a certain way. As I said, the times of the architects from the Ebony Tower are over, but those architects need to be hands-on, have respect, be able to communicate with other people, listen to them, convince them to use the given architecture and want to work together. Same goes for the process expert. You cannot, in most of the times, in these days, it's difficult to impose a particular, a particular process by force on someone. You can try to do it with a different, depending on the organization, with the culture of the organization. Usually you want to generate some buy-in. You want to have people convinced, yeah, that's the right way. I trust this person. I know this person is good, and I trust that this person developed a good process, and probably this person needs to think about how to bring other people to participate in creating these processes, and so on and so on. The same goes to those other types or trajectories. Out of these, all those trajectories technically can go to distinguished engineer, who are the highest level engineering roles in the organization, or principal engineers, depending on the company. They might become VP of engineering, or they might become CTOs. What is important, I think, is that the impact in all those roles beyond senior engineering role. When we talk about staff, principal, we expect the impact to not be only on the particular project, but we expect the impact going into the or affecting the entire organization, or several different teams at least. And the leadership, because of that, I mentioned, is a critical part of this role. And I like to think about this. It's not perfect, sort of the description, but I think it's a sort of the simplification that, at least for me, it works. It gives me a good picture. Is I think about individual contributors as a sum. You have people, and everyone adds something to the solution. And then when you think about people who are in this leadership role, which are obvious leadership roles, or the part of the leadership part of the role is obvious for people managers. Obviously, we talk about this in general, but I think that we forget that even in those roles, the leadership is an important factor. And for everyone who is in this leadership role, I think about them like acting more like elements in the multiplication. So the good thing is that if they do great work, they can multiply the effectiveness of the organization. The bad thing, obviously, is everyone who ever had a bad manager knows that they can severely decrease the effectiveness of the entire team. And the uncertainty, as I said, in all those roles is higher than before. It's like typical for many of these roles, for many of these trajectories, to deal with uncertainty, figure out what the problems are. The days of getting the problem specified, like give me the problem, I will find a solution, these days are over for most of these roles past the senior engineering role. Now, some people ask me about this, this myth of brilliant developer. Like, can I progress further in my career if I only focus on my individual contribution? I work hard at something, I am a true genius, but I don't want to be bothered with people. I want to do something, I want to be great on this particular, piece of technology or these problems. I will solve them everywhere. Company will make, millions because of my work. I should be, rewarded on the same level as director at Google. I don't know, something like that. I think that the problem with that approach is that outside of the big tech organizations that might have actually the needs for some engineers, when we talk en masse about the whole industry, I think unfortunately that for the small companies, the skills wouldn't be just effective enough to to warranty a very high level of salaries. And most big companies, especially those that are not very technical, when we talk about companies, we talk about, for instance, Netflix, Amazon, all the companies that we read in blogs, or we hear about conferences. They are very well advanced in technology. But most of the companies, if you look at Fortune 500 or FTSE 100, these are companies that they are at least mediocre in technology to some extent. They struggle, like 80% of the industry. And for them, I don't even think that I don't even think they have required engineering culture that would allow such a person, a brilliant single individual contributor, to really contribute enough to guarantee a very high level of the seniority that would be paid for. And the last thing, a little bit controversial, I think in many, unfortunately, 80% or something, far majority of the problems that we solve or projects that we solve in the industry doesn't really require that level of sophistication. Sure, it might at some point require it, but let's be honest, a lot of things, and that's a good thing, by the way, in the industry, is that some things are repeatable. There are best solutions for certain problems. not every single problem requires rocket science to be solved. So we talked about these overarching trajectories, leadership, which I rather like to call people management. Then there is a technical one, and there is one more that I think organizations in general don't pay enough attention to, don't emphasize enough, is that there's also a senior engineer. There is nothing bad, going to the level of the senior engineer and staying on the level for the entire life. Let's look at the, from the perspective, you usually at this level get sufficient money to, to survive, to live a decent life in most of the places in the world. And if you don't like to go into, people management, which is a completely different set of skills, and if you don't want this uncertainty and, develop those leadership skills and everything that is, required for these roles, it might be absolutely great place, totally great place to be for the, your whole career. I think that was obvious in many, countries where, like in the US or UK, where, the IT industry started a little bit earlier. I think today is maybe more obvious, but 10 years ago and 15 years ago, it would be very hard to find someone who is like 40 or 50 and is senior engineer. Because everyone thought, like that was, I think, the pressure that you got to move somewhere higher, and back then the higher was usually people management, which I think was very bad for the industry, by the way. So, how do you pick, which kind of a career would you like? Which kind of path would you like to pick? And given that these roles are different in different organizations, they might have repeated names, but really the type of work might differ, sometimes a lot. I think that the important thing what you can do is to look how other people in your organization, how their calendar looks like. You can talk with them, you can see, what kind of work they are doing, and that's a great, source of knowledge. The other thing is this outside network, which I think is also important, and I cannot emphasize this enough. When you think about junior engineer, obviously junior engineer has a lot of people in the organization that could mentor them. Obviously, right? Hopefully, like this, your organization hopefully is not only juniors. So that is sort of given. But obviously, on the other side, if you talk about the CEO, so the highest, sort of the title in the organization, probably no one in the organization has a sufficient experience to coach or mentor CEO. So these are two extremes. Like, both are hopefully obvious. Now, what happens in between is the shades of gray. The higher you go, the less likely you would get the mentorship and coaching in your organization. And I think at a certain point, after the senior level, you got to find out and build a network outside of your company. These are some of the good places where you can find this network, but these are obviously not the only ones. Check some materials which I pasted, that I put at the end of the presentation. And remember, last thing that I wanted to emphasize here is that failure actually is an option. So I know, I can say a lot of people right now that weren't really, convinced whether they should go into people management or, further technical career. They picked one choice. Usually that was people management. And after some time, they decided, you know what, that's really not for me. Which, by the way, is fine. What I think is that if someone spends as an engineer, software developer, spend some time as a people manager going into engineering management or some kind of that role, and later, steps aside to maybe back to on the path to the technical path, I think it actually makes them better engineers in the end, to appreciate how the other world looks like. And in most organizations, as far as I know, in most organizations, the change of path is totally possible, and it's not a big thing. It's probably important to to say that upfront and discuss this upfront with your manager whenever you are going into this people management role. And by the way, I think that the good time, if you go into people management, you are unsure, it's probably good to spend 6-12 months at least there, and not to, because a lot of people are scared after first 1, 2, 3 months, and I think it requires a little bit more time to really get a grasp on it. And after 6 months, 12 months, if you don't think like that's the thing that you would like to do, that's probably a good time to consider switching back to purely technical career. So the last chapter, what's needed for the leap? I think that coming from the first part, from the prologue of this presentation, I think the importance of the communication it's difficult to overstate it. Like, it's not only about, sure, some presentation, spoken communication, but being able to effectively convey what you want in a written form, and the written form might be a Jira ticket, it might be a design doc, but it also might be an email. It's a difference between convincing someone, like usually some stakeholders or someone higher in the organization, by giving just enough information that is needed. Those people are usually overwhelmed with information. If you can do it in such a way that they will read it, understand it, that's a sometimes difference between something happening and not happening. And I think that sometimes that makes a bigger difference than the actual merits of the proposal that are being suggested, how you communicate certain things. So the leadership skills, I was talking about this, leading versus managing, two different things. But leadership, managing might not necessarily be needed on both of these paths, but leadership skills definitely required in both of the paths, technical and people management. Handling uncertainty, clear specifications are gone after the senior level roles, acting as a multiplier instead of just, instead of being, part of the sum. And that means coaching, mentoring, enabling, so making sure that the entire organizations work better because of your work. Managing your relationships, that's an important thing. Everyone sort of intuitively understands that you need to be in good relationship with your boss, naturally. But for higher level roles, like for the junior roles, the peers of your boss won't really care, if you are promoted or not. But for higher roles, there is usually some quota or some budget. And several people need to decide, maybe those peers of your manager, actually, if they agree to the promotion, of your promotion, they would need to resign from some budget for promotion in their part. Maybe they have a quota and they might be, given number of principals engineers, or maybe there is a limited number of, senior engineering managers. So they take an active part. And by the end, this person needs to eventually, this guy or this lady will come to this person, and it's better that this person, boss of your boss, really knows you and is familiar with you and your work, and that would make the actual promotion much easier. About the business understanding, so sort of, I think that we understand that the domain of the business in which we work is something that to build software effectively, you need to be familiar with it. But I think it goes much further. You need to be, as you go higher the further in the engineering career, you also need to be aware and familiar with the setting around the projects, by which I mean different people involved, customers, stakeholders, dynamics that happen between. That also is an important thing. Why those people, for instance, don't like themselves, and how it affects your work, or how it affects the proposal that you are doing. So this is also something that you might want to pay attention to. And the last but not least, when it comes to the promotion, the sad truth is that it might be just impossible. So again, coming back to this junior example, I think in most organizations in the world, if you are a junior and you do good job, you would be promoted to mid-level engineer. Well, there might be a problem that there is for instance, I don't know, no budget in the company is going bankrupt or whatever, in which case they might not give you a salary rise, but they can still promote you. You see, if you fulfill the expectations, it should be possible. But on the other side of the spectrum, let's imagine that you want to be CTO, for instance, and you are a principal engineer. Well, the sad news is that if you already have a CTO in your organization, there might not be a place for you in that particular organization. So the thing is that it might be not just possible, but what it means is in a given place and given time. The CTO might leave, or there might be a sudden growth in the organization, which would make a new position. Field CTOs, for instance, might be an option if the organization grows. And it might just not be the right place. Well, at some point you need to say, okay, maybe there is no role for me in this company, but there will be in a different company. So key takeaways before we wrap it up. It's not the most important things from the presentation, but I thought that these are the things that are, like when I talked with people, weren't the most obvious. So one thing is that staying at the senior level is not a failure. I think in this date and time, it's totally okay You know, you at some point decide, I want to focus on my family or my hobbies or whatever. I just like my work. I stay on this level forever. That's completely fine. Leadership trajectory is not the one-way ticket, or leadership or actually people management trajectory is not one-way ticket. As I said earlier, it actually might be beneficial for you to go there and go back. Makes a better software engineer. And the skills that might have brought you to the level of senior engineer might not necessarily be the skills that will get you further. And with that, I'll leave you with some further reading. These are just 3 positions that I picked. I have many more. So if you are interested in the topic, you can take a look at this publication. There is About Me section. You'll find my X handle, Twitter handle. You also find my email. You may ask me later on. I'll send you some more positions if you are interested. And that is it from my side. Thank you for listening to my presentation.